Welcome, everyone. We'll get started. This is House Bill 4545, Webinar 2, regarding accelerated instruction, tutoring, and teaching assignments. So thank you all for joining us today. We hope to provide some great information about the bill that was signed on June 16th by the governor. We'll start with introductions. My name is Colby Self. I'm the Director of Texas Tutoring Supports, and we have Dr. Ruiz Mills. I'll let her say hi.
Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday.
And she's the Director of Effective District Practices, and also Grace Wu, Director of Strategic Compensation.
Good morning, everyone.
So our objectives for today are to provide context and guidance for local educational agencies, or LEAs, as they'll be referred to throughout the presentation, in implementing key components of House Bill 4545 for the 21-22 school year. We're also here to provide an overview of tutoring and teaching assignments, as well as to provide a foundational overview for House Bill 4545. So there's a lot of information to present, so you may want to write down your questions as we progress through the different areas and add it to the Q&A if your question is not answered. As time permits, we'll try to answer some of the questions. Other questions that we do not have time to get to will be added and addressed through a Q&A. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ruiz Mills, who's going to provide a recap from webinar number 1. And then I will take over and talk a little bit about tutoring specifically after we do an overview, accelerated instruction, a review of that. And then Grace will take over and she reviews teacher assignments. So Dr. Ruiz Mills, I'll let you get started with the recap.
Thank you, Colby. If we can go ahead and move to the next slide, we'll just go ahead and do an overview. As mentioned last week, House Bill 4545 went to effect on June the 16th of 2021. It is a requirement for this upcoming school year, beginning in the 2021 fall semester and thereafter. Accelerated instruction is one of those requirements. Accelerated instruction is for any student who did not pass STAR in grades 3 through 8, so that's grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, or a STAR end of course assessment. Accelerated instruction must be delivered beginning in the fall of 2021 or subsequent summer. Again, that's for any student in grades 3 through 8 who did not pass the STAR or the STAR end of course exam. Accelerated learning committees are for students in grades 3, 5, or 8 who did not pass reading or math. Students in grades 3, 5, or 8 who did not pass the STAR assessment in reading or math will then be participating in an accelerated learning committee and will also receive accelerated instruction. We will have those conversations regarding accelerated learning committees at our next webinar on July the 20th. Let's go ahead and look at a question that we received after the last webinar. What is the meaning of each time a student fails to perform satisfactorily on an assessment? The answer to that is on the next slide. And what that means is any student who did not achieve at least approaches in any subject assessed must receive accelerated instruction. If they were at the approaches, meets, or masters, then they would not be required to receive accelerated instruction. So if the student was below approaches, which is the did not meets category, they are the students that would receive the instruction. Let me give you an example. If I'm a 5th grade student and I score approaches in reading, meets in math, but did not meet in science, then my accelerated instruction for 30 hours, 30 minutes a week would be in science only. So again, it's 30 hours per subject. And next slide. This right here is our flow chart. Hopefully this can help give some context. So for students in grades 3 through 12, LEAs must evaluate the following decision points. The reason we put it that way is because, again, accelerated instruction is for students in grades 3 through 8, or any student who did not pass the STAR end of course exam. And so that may potentially include retesters at the high school level. Did the student perform satisfactorily on the STAR or the STAR EOC? Again, satisfactorily is approaches, meets, or masters. If the answer is yes, then no action is required. If the answer is no, then accelerated instruction is required, a minimum of 30 hours per subject, 30 minutes per week. Is the student in grades 3, 5, or 8? And did they not perform satisfactorily in math or reading? If the answer to that is yes, then the student would participate in an accelerated learning committee. If the answer is no, then an ALC is not required. Now, if the student did not test, we ask that you refer back to the FAQ. I want to say it's question number 2 that addresses students who did not test and are required to receive accelerated instruction. However, the LEAs may administer an assessment to show grade level proficiency on the TEKS, and that could be the state release beginning of your assessment that could be used. So LEAs could determine and identify whether or not the students are in need of accelerated instruction. That is only for students who did not test. Everything else is based on the STAR exams.
All right, thank you, Monica. I hope that clarified some questions we had from our last call and some questions you may have today. The 87th legislature addressed provided new requirements that we must follow under House Bill 4545. Learning acceleration is one, which we've just provided an overview of, but also Senate Bill 1356 and Senate Bill 288 provided opportunities for retired teachers to work for school districts as tutors without penalty to their pension, or requiring contributions in some case to TRS. So if you are considering as an LEA of hiring retired teachers, it is encouraged that they contact TRS to ensure that they're following the guidelines set forth in the new Senate bills so that it does not negatively affect their pensions. And we're excited to be able to have retired teachers as a source for tutors. As you see with high impact tutoring, quality tutors are well-versed with instructional practices and the materials that they'll be using. So having retired teachers on board is going to be a great thing for us. We're going to cover a couple of options today. Option 1 will be covered later in the presentation, and it is regarding the assignment of a student to a teacher who is certified as Master Exemplary or recognized. Option 2 is what we're going to talk about right now as we lead into tutoring. Students that receive at least 30 hours of supplemental instruction, in this case through tutoring. And again, accelerated learning is required for the students based on their performance on the STAR or EOC exams. Dr. Ruiz-Mills will cover some more about the accelerated learning requirements.
Thank you. So these are the requirements that we reviewed last week for accelerated instruction. In a nutshell, accelerated instruction needs to occur once per week for a minimum of 30 minutes. There were some questions regarding this statement. For accelerated instruction, not to be confused with the high impact tutoring recommendation, but for accelerated instruction, it is a minimum of 30 minutes per week and a total of 30 hours. Now, the accelerated instruction can be done in small groups of no more than 3 students. We are currently working on providing resources because parents would need to be in agreement if this group would be larger than 3. Every student participating in that group would need to have this signed agreement giving the parents permission. So we are working on some resources that we will have available for you on webinar 4. The intent of the accelerated instruction is to help the student in achieving satisfactory performance in that content area. And Colby will discuss later on regarding the training for the people who provide the instruction regarding the instructional materials. Also, we are working on developing scenarios as well as what would this instruction look like as a supplement in a small group, as a push-in model to help assist our LEAs with meeting this requirement. The next slide discusses what courses the students cannot be removed from. Of course, the students cannot be removed from the foundation curriculum, which is reading, math, science, and social studies. But the House bill also states that students should not be removed from their enrichment curriculum as well. And the enrichment curriculum courses are languages other than English, fine arts, CTE, health, PE, technology, apps, and also they should not be removed from recess or physical activity that is available to other students in that grade level. So again, this goes back to rethinking our master schedules and our staffing patterns. How are we going to monitor this, and what are we going to do to where it looks a little bit differently? So we'll discuss that again in webinar 4 with some different options.
So a point that we need to clarify is high impact tutoring versus House Bill 4545. I want to be sure to differentiate the two for you. Best practices are what are discussed when we're talking about a high impact tutoring program. We're looking at the evidence-based practices, and when we talk about House Bill 4545, there are some minimum statutory requirements which we have gone over. High impact tutoring has been around for several years and has been implemented by several districts, even districts in the state of Texas. So there may be some differences that need to be considered. If you have an existing high impact tutoring or a tutoring program, you'll need to evaluate those and say, do they meet the House Bill 4545 minimum requirements for tutoring? Most high impact tutoring programs, again, do meet the requirements. As an example, something that your or another high impact tutoring program may have has to do with the ratio of students. House Bill 4545 delineates that you should have a 1-to-3 ratio, with exception of if you do receive a parent waiver, it can be higher. But if you have an existing tutoring program that, let's say, has a 4-to-1 ratio or 5-to-1 ratio, that would need to be adjusted to comply with House Bill 4545 requirements for the specific grades that it pertains to. High impact tutoring, again, does implement best practices. It is often involves additional grade levels that House Bill 4545 does not include as part of statute. But please review those if you have an existing program that you're looking to ensure that it is adapted to meet the needs of House Bill 4545 as well. So where to get started? If you're new to the tutoring realm, and we're all new to the House Bill 4545 requirements, some guidelines to help you get the ball rolling, so to speak, in standing up a tutoring program. Identify the students who need the tutoring support, identifying and recruiting tutors. There'll be a training aspect for the tutors as they if they're implementing high impact tutoring or a basic level tutoring, they're going to need instructional support on the supplemental instructional materials that are provided. Establish the tutoring curriculum. So for a lot of districts, that could be existing curriculum, or we'll talk about other resources of curriculum here shortly. The sessions, when are they going to be scheduled, and overall the general program management. So those are just some surface level considerations to get started as you consider how you're going to implement the tutoring program for your school district or school. So LEAs have three choices. We have three approaches we want to present and some of the resources that are available. Build it yourself. As mentioned before, you already have a program, or you can conceptualize a program. There's some resources that we've conducted, some statewide webinars that are located on our Texas Tutoring Support webpage. The High Impact Tutoring Toolkit, which we'll talk about here shortly, and the High Impact Tutoring Workshop Series, which is currently ongoing. We will provide the use of the vetted Texas Tutoring Core. So this is a TEA approved list where we've vetted tutoring providers, and they'll be able to provide either a partial or full turnkey tutoring program support to LEAs. We've also are going to provide the VTTC subsidized instructional materials and training, which will be out shortly, which provide curriculum supports and instructional materials and training materials for the tutors that will be implementing those programs. I mentioned the High Impact Tutoring Kit. It is available, and again, it is promoting the high impact best practices from a national standpoint. So again, we also want to be sure we're using that lens as we develop a high impact tutoring program, that we are meeting the compliance and the statutory requirements for House Bill 4545. Again, the webinars are available for the first 3 webinars. I know in webinar 2, we had exemplars of scheduling practices, and in webinar 3, scheduling practices if you're struggling with how to integrate the tutoring into the school day or provide it before or after school. But again, we have the webinar today. Next week, we are going to have an additional webinar surrounding decision number 6 on the T-class application on the 14th. And the week of August 9th, we will kick off our second cohort that is being conducted through Amplify at this time. We also will be rolling out regional trainings through our region service centers here shortly. Again, the tutoring workshop series is ongoing, and it really does go through to develop the programmatic needs of a high impact tutoring program. Workshop 1, it started with orientation. Workshop 1 was program aim. Workshop 2 helps identify students and budget needs. Workshop 3 talks about tutoring and materials, and workshop 4 is evaluation and communication piece with that. Again, regional cohorts will begin soon, and there'll be information out about those as well. All right, in order to assist in identifying specific vendors, we screened the various vendors in the many needs of areas of support. These will be for math and reading. We're also we'll provide the pre-approved list of tutors for recruitment and labor of school districts. That's probably one of our #1 questions we receive is, where do we get the tutors? Well, we're gonna help you by providing this list in a district a group of resources. We also have, as a reminder, the retired teachers available as a pool to tap as well. The first piece, again, is the staffing and curriculum. And here's another exemplar that kind of outlines what is going to be provided under the vetted Texas Tutoring Core. So we have two distinct components: the pre-approved tutoring providers, as we talked about before. Just to reemphasize, there are going to be some full service organizations that are providing what I would call turnkey tutoring implementation and programs. There's also partial tutor organizations that will provide staffing. This could be more for LEAs that already have their own curriculum. They may already have their own structures and platforms that they're going to use to monitor the tutoring, but they're really looking for additional staffing that is maybe hybrid, virtual or in person, or totally in person or totally virtual. Then again, the TEA subsidized tutoring supports includes the instructional materials for K platform and the aligned training that is needed to ensure that those platforms are implemented with fidelity. The use of the vetted Texas Tutoring Core can definitely reduce the overall cost to LEAs. Looking at the cost of being 60 to 80% is personnel. So there's going to be a varied range of per pupil costs, and that's something to evaluate with the VTTC. There are some grant opportunities coming available for LEAs through T-Class that you can explore as well. That would help offset some of the costs of implementing the tutoring. So additional funding and support for learning acceleration. Starting in May, we did have the webinars that are posted and available for a general overview of the tutoring guidelines. House Bill 45, we're going to offer additional supports for parent guidance in the new requirements. Additional state and grant funding opportunities are going to be available in mid-July. From the tutoring standpoint, HIT implementation workshops, we're already leading the first cohort with the second cohort to start in August. The pre-approved list for tutoring providers will be published soon, as well as the BTTC list will be available as well for people to start accessing. ESC tutor training will begin in August, and this is ESCs also will have a trainer of trainers to help support the LEAs with implementation of their high impact tutoring programs as well. So if you were to look at a checklist for LEAs, one, review House Bill 4545, the language outlined in that bill. Review high impact tutoring toolkit. This is an initial resource. We are developing a toolkit 2.0 that'll be coming out shortly, but the initial toolkit's a great place to start. Evaluate your capability to stand up a tutoring program. Identify gaps you may have in capacity where you may need to access some of the resources that are provided, and evaluate those options available, such as a vetted Texas Tutoring Core and other resources that are offered at a statewide level. So with that, I'm going to turn the next section over to Grace, where she's going to talk about specific teacher assignment criteria. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Self. Do you mind going on to the next slide for me? And hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you all. And so Mr. Self just covered option 2. For all students who are required to have accelerated instruction, Mr. Self just offered an option around option 2, and I'm here to talk about option 1. I do want to state right off the bat that in 2021, we had 4,900 designated teachers across 127 districts. And so what that means is that option 1 may not be an option for many districts in the state, at least for this next year. In addition, even if a district employs a designated teacher, they may not employ enough designated teachers to meet all the requirements for accelerated instruction. And so some districts may need to use a combination of option 1 and 2. So first off, I'd love to just clarify, what is a teacher designation? What does it mean to be master, recognized, or exemplary? And so I want to just first name that there is some confusion around the term being a master certified teacher. And that is because there used to be a master teacher certification available, such as master technology, master math, or master science. And so when we talk about teacher designations, we are not talking about the master certification. Instead, we are talking about a recognized exemplary or master designation that is issued by the Texas Education Agency. Teachers may earn these designations if 1, they have a national board certification, or 2, if their district has been approved for a local designation system and has been approved to issue these designations. And so one of the first questions that I think many districts will have is, how do I know if I have a designated teacher? And so all teachers who are currently designated, their designations will appear on their SBEC virtual certification. And so when this deck is posted, this is a link to the virtual SBEC certification lookup. And if a teacher is designated, there will be a marker in the top right corner of that virtual certification. And so, for example, in this image, we have a designated master teacher, and that teacher will be designated through the 23-24 school year. I also want to note that these designations do not apply to certain assignments like certifications do. And so what this means for you all is that if you have a designated teacher, that designated teacher may teach more than one assignment or one subject area. Mr. Self, can you go on to the next slide? Great, thank you. I think there are also some questions in the chat that says, what can we do to get more designated teachers? And so, like I stated earlier, we currently have about 4,900 designated teachers. And so many of our districts may not be able to use the first option outlined for accelerated learning. However, if a district is interested in getting more designated teachers, we have 3 options below. And so the first option is for a district to apply for a local designation system and be approved by Texas Tech and TEA. If you want specific timelines or you have questions, please feel free to visit our website or email us at tia@tea.texas.gov. The second option is if a teacher has a national board certification. And so if you employ a national board certified teacher, then they may earn a designation every year in April. And so one great next step is to look up the National Board Certified Teacher Directory to see if you have any National Board Certified teachers. I do want to note that this directory is maintained by each individual teacher. So if the individual teacher has not updated their information, then it will not show that that teacher is in your district. So additional steps may need to be taken, such as reaching out to your teachers to understand who has a National Board certification. And then a third option or a way to employ a designated teacher is essentially to employ a teacher who received a designation while working in a different district. And so this year, as you guys are hiring, you may employ a teacher who was previously designated in another district. Hopefully you'll look them up on their virtual certification to confirm their designation, and then you would employ a designated teacher. Great, Mr. Self, on to the next slide, thank you. And so for districts who are looking long-term in terms of having more designated teachers, I do want to note that this is a multi-year timeline. And so it will take approximately 3 years, depending on where you are in the system application process. And so, for example, if you are a cohort C, you would first issue designations in April 2022. If you are cohort D, you would first issue designations in April 2023. And so just wanted to put out this timeline as you guys are thinking towards the future in terms of wanting to have more designated teachers in your district.
All right, thank you, Grace. I wanted to point out before we look at taking some of the questions that have been posted, the accelerated learning site has been posted and is available. Here's a QR code you can scan as well to provide some resources. And also House Bill 4545 FAQ document has been taking questions for a couple of weeks now, and we're updating that as we get new questions and making sure that we have the most updated information provided for you. Also, if you have any additional House Bill 4545 questions, you may send an email to acceleratedinstruction@tea.texas.gov, and we'll try to answer those questions for you. If not, we will often include the questions you send as part of the FAQ document. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. And
no, Colby, keep sharing the screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Unless you're going, because you might want to go back. If y'all are able to take some questions, we do have some questions for you all to address.
Sure. I'll keep sharing the screen then.
Okay. Can you clarify the webinars that are going to be happening for tutoring? And then Dr. Ruiz-Mills, if you would clarify when webinar 3 for House Bill 4545 will be.
So the webinars for tutoring have already begun. We do have the 3 posted on our tutoring webpage that outline the implementation of high impact tutoring. So those are available, and they, as mentioned in the presentation, they do have examples of districts that have implemented tutoring and how the scheduling works and some of the other considerations that they've had to make. We do have the current workshop going on now with cohort 1, and the second workshop with cohort 2 will start in August. And information about that will be available, as well as regional webinars and information will be coming shortly as well.
Okay, and then there is a T-class tutoring webinar coming up next week.
Correct.
Can you give the date and time for that one?
Good. Let me go to that slide so everybody can see that information here. So decision number 6, which is the tutoring aspect of T-class, will be on July 14th, 2021. There's a link in the presentation we'll post for that timing, so you can go and register for that as well.
Great, thanks so much.
Yes, and we have additional webinars coming up on July the 20th. We have webinar 3, which will focus on the accelerated learning committees. And then on July the 29th will be a resource webinar, webinar 4. And both of those webinars can be found at the Accelerated Learning website. You click on House Bill 4545 and the registration links are also available.
Great. Dr. Ruiz-Mills, can you share and restate, you might want to go back to that slide, restate who is required to receive accelerated instruction and who's required to give an accelerated learning committee?
Yes, thank you, Colby, for going to the flow chart. So we'll review this one more time. Again, students in grades 3 through 12, that would be grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and then any student who took a STAR end of course exam. Those are the groupings that you look at when you're evaluating the decision points. So if a student performed satisfactorily on a STAR or a STAR end of course exam, meaning they were in the approaches, meets, or masters, if they scored in that area, no action is required. However, if they were below approaches, then accelerated instruction is required. Again, accelerated instruction is for any student who did not pass the STAR or STAR end of course exam. It is a minimum of 30 hours per subject, 30 minutes per week. Now, if the student is in grades 3, 5, or 8 and did not pass their math or their reading or both STAR assessments, an accelerated learning committee is required. So the accelerated learning committee is only required for students in 3rd, 5th, or 8th grade who did not pass the math or reading STAR assessment. If they passed math or reading and say did not pass science, then they would not need an ALC, but they would need the accelerated instruction. And accelerated instruction is embedded through all of this, including students who are in an accelerated learning committee.
Thank you, Dr. Ruiz-Mills. Grace, could you cover if a district does not have any current teachers with designations, what should they do?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lizette, and thank you, Mr. Self. Yeah, so I think the best thing to do is number 1, and if you could go back one more slide, Mr. Self, that'd be helpful. So you really have 2 options. Number 1, you can start on the local designation system process, which is a multi-year process that requires approval from TEA. And so if you're currently a cohort C, which we have about 72 districts, and you guys are approved, you'll start issuing designations April of next year. If a cohort D, which we have, I think, almost 200 districts involved, then you'll start issuing designations in 23-24. And so option 1 really is a future leaning option for getting more designated teachers in your district. Another option to consider is national board. And so many of our districts have told us they're unaware of which of their teachers have a national board certification, or they're also unaware if their teachers are in process of a national board certification. And so many districts have reached out to their teachers to see where they are in the process. If your teacher has a national board certification, we'll process their designation annually in April. And so option 2 is probably not a helpful tool for the 21-22 school year, but could be for the future if you have national board teachers in process.
Great, thank you. Monica, there are some questions about if you have a student that is served through a special education program, can the ART committee serve as the accelerated learning committee? And can the IEP serve as the accelerated learning plan or accelerated educational plan?
Yes, that's a great question and one that we discussed earlier. So yes, the ARD committee could serve as the accelerated learning committee, and the IEP would serve as the accelerated learning plan.
And then is it safe to say when we're talking about students needing to have an accelerated learning committee because they did not perform satisfactorily on math and reading and they were 3rd, 5th, and 8th graders, that the educational plan would be to provide that accelerated instruction as rising 4th graders, rising 6th graders, and rising 9th graders?
Yes, ma'am. So you would make that plan with the intent of how it will follow the student into the next grade level. And one of the questions that we have also received was, what if the student is in 5th grade going into 6th grade? So it would really need to be a transition plan with dialogue from the receiving campus as well.
And when will any kind of templates or for parent communication or resources for accelerated learning committees be available?
So we will have those available for the June 29th webinar 4. And if there are any LEAs out there that would like to share materials that they have used in the past for GPC, so we can go back and revise them together, please feel free to send them to me at the accelerated.instruction@tea.texas.gov website. Did I give the wrong email, Colby?
No,
Okay.
I'll highlight it on the screen.
All right, and we will be posting an updated FAQ. It will probably be, right now it's out for legal review. So we did receive several questions after the last webinar. We will add these questions and we'll get that out probably at the beginning of next week, so that it is posted on our website for the superintendent call for commissioner next week. He'll be highlighting the responses as well. We are going to save, because the rest of the questions do require some collaboration on the team, but we will be posting these slides as well as the recording of this webinar on the accelerated learning webpage. And so you're able to access and using that QR code that Mr. Self has projected. Anything else that the panelists would like to add before we close out our webinar today?
I appreciate the questions that are coming in, so just continue sending them to us and we'll respond. And if you haven't received a response or need further clarification, just continue to resend it.
Yes, thank you for all the questions as you look to evaluate how your specific LEA is going to stand up a tutoring program to meet the needs of your students. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you all so much for attending. We appreciate y'all joining us today.